with all the things that I could be podcasting about right now, this latest tweet from community manager Lore is not helping things. This is MultimediaJay radio style for Thursday, March 28th, 2019. Let's start the show.
MultimediaJay radio style.
A random musing, take it how you will. It really sucks seeing outrage about layoffs at game studios coming from the same people who say things like everyone who worked on this game should be fired. If you want to support game devs, do it before they lose their jobs too. Ladies and gentlemen, Lore's Jessica moment, and the latest example of Blizzie knows best. This cocky attitude that keeps coming up over and over and over again throughout the lifetime of World of Warcraft, even going all the way back to the original game. Now, there are a couple key differences between this Jessica moment and the original Jessica moment that I'm naming this stuff after with ArenaNet last year, and I don't think those differences actually make things better in any way, shape, or form. At least CM Lore here has the ass-covering disclaimer that opinions shared on the Twitter are his own. But this all kind of gets wild-carded by the unfortunate reality that Lore, unlike the original Jessica last year, is actually someone whose job it is to interact with people. He's not a rogue dev taking swipes at the player base because they disagree with something. This is actually somebody whose job it is to actually be a people person. And this is why the ass-covering disclaimer does not exempt him from being held accountable by the Blizzard brass. I'm actually watching this now to see what happens to him, because if you consider what it is that Lore is supposed to do, be a face among people of this game and by extension the company, he should have known better than to pull something like this. Now, we'll get into the whole thing about what if he's right a little later on, but let's talk about just the reality of what he is as a community manager here. He's actually a people person, so he needs to have credibility when he's the talking head on the developer videos and whatnot that make their way onto Twitch about state of the game and other things like that. And he needs to have credibility when he's representing Blizzard with blue text on the forums. Now let's take a closer look at the attitude that's getting represented in this tweet. A random musing, take it how you will. In other words, what you do with this is your thing. So he's already kind of saying he's already washing his hands of this even before he posts something. Yeah, it's his opinion on the matter, but obviously as we continue reading, there are problems with even what he's saying in and of itself on its own merit. It really sucks seeing outrage about layoffs at game studios coming from the same people who say things like everyone who worked on this game should be fired. Stop. Everyone who worked on this game should be fired. Who's saying that? Who are they? How many people are there that are actually doing that? Corroborate this. What examples are there of people who think that everybody at Blizzard needs to go because of the state of BFA? Where are these people? Because even the critics that I've heard talking about BFA are saying there are some good things to BFA, like the art department, just like in Warlords of Draenor. They're doing a great job with the visuals and whatnot. And there are some other things here and there, some other elements of the game that people like. It's the issues that they dislike that are really kind of stealing the show here. Things like, for example, island expeditions not living up to their potential, and Warfronts, this is the big one for me that keeps me away from the game, Warfronts being unlosable. Basically, finishing the progression towards not having an environment where players have to rise to the occasion, and so you get people whining if they don't get everything handed to them. But we'll get back to the thing with WoW's player base in a bit. If you want to support game devs, do it before they lose their jobs too. Now, this would be a valid point, except what it's asking here is for people to just be fanboys of game developers. And guess what? This is coming from somebody who works for the very company that made the celebrity game developer what it is in the MMO world. Why do you think so many people out there know a lot of these Blizzard folks by their handles from the forums, like Calgan and even Ghostcrawler? I mean, the strength of the name was so strong that Blizzard actually let Greg Street have the Ghostcrawler handle back on Twitter, even though he's been gone from Blizzard for years. So the whole idea of the game devs being on pedestals is something that you see with Blizzard. So they created this. If there's an environment where the developers feel like they're under the microscope too much versus the player base, this is what they created, and this is what they own. Likewise with the player base. And it's very simple stuff when it comes to business. You own what you oversee. Whatever you are in charge of, that's yours. If you build a business up, what you build up is what you own. And Blizzard is no exception. And the way things have gone with WoW is no exception. Throughout its rise and fall, from their beginnings when they couldn't even keep enough servers running because of the high demand, to the peak in Lich King, to everything that's happened since then, they own it. And yet the attitude that I see over and over again is Blizzie knows best, even now on unofficial Twitters like this. This is just what Lord thinks on his own time. Okay? If that's what it is, then that's what it is. But you still see the Blizzard mentality here. You still see this finger-waggy Blizzie knows best attitude, where the developers have standoffish attitudes towards their customers, which is what the players are. Even as WoW continues to have the issues that it has, and competing MMOs continue to steal its thunder. Sometimes with new ideas that World of Warcraft either is not doing, or their version of it is half-assed. Like zone scaling. Zone scaling was kind of half-cooked. Eventually you do get to the point where it's not worth it to go back to certain parts of the outdoor world again, but it just happens later, as opposed to other games where it doesn't happen at all. But don't you dare try to talk to anybody in the Blizzard camp about good ideas in other games. You will get talked around in circles and double-talked and blah, 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 until eventually, after X amount of time, they cave and introduce it. It's been a thing throughout the history of the game. The way paladins were treated, free spell damage for healers, even transmogrification. There was cosmetic armor in MMOs prior to World of Warcraft, but there was this big blub 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 discussion about all of this for how long before transmog was in? After Lich King, actually. It's not a new idea. It was just blub 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 back and forth, 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 until it finally happened. And in my case, as somebody who mains a paladin in this game, going all the way back to the original WoW, there was also the blip 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 about letting paladins actually play as what they actually were. Like other hybrids and other types of characters that suffered these problems in the early stages of the game, you would level one way and then be expected to play a completely different way for endgame. You'd be the actual Holy Knight as you went from 1 to 60, and then you would have to be the Healy buff bot, stand in the back in your dress, casting heals, la-la, and I'm not talking Lalafells in Final Fantasy either, at endgame. That was your raid roll. Did Paladins bring this up? You bet they did. And guess what happened? Blip, 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 until finally some semblance of, we're sorry it was like this in Burning Crusade for tanks. But if Retribution Paladins brought anything up, what about DPS? What about the last roll that you guys haven't addressed? Blip, 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 back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Retribution is a soloing and leveling tree, blah, 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 blah. So on and so forth, until finally, in the pre-launch patch before Lich King, representing 2 expansions worth of content, aka, if you want to count the original game as an expansion, the way we talk about expansions nowadays is basically major advances in the amount of content available in the game. So it took until the 3rd expansion, or years, before Paladins finally became viable in all of their roles in some way, shape, or form. But things continued until Lich King too. as the tanks started to get a little too far away from each other and be able to tank different things, that eventually got to the point where warriors started losing their spots to paladins because of AoE. And then there was a discussion where warriors got sick of getting kicked from groups in the dungeon finder because folks would be doing like halls of reflection and the warrior didn't have the AE to control all of the trash mobs correctly. And so they would come onto the forums and be like, I'm getting kicked from groups because when I get into a group for halls of reflection, everybody else is like, oh great, another warrior. And then they boot me out. But what happened? Until finally Thunderclap starts to serve a role similar to Paladin Consecration, even though Warriors had it all along and they had options. They just didn't work as well as the Porcupine tank that was Paladins in their days as a gimmick tank before that was ironed out. And there's another big example that we can talk about. We're so out of order with these, but they're all relevant. Free spell damage for healers in Burning Crusade. It got so bad for healers in terms of not being able to play the freaking game outside of healing people like in raids, that some of them were re-rolling warlocks and rogues, DPS alts, just to play the rest of the game that they paid for. Guess what happened? Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, until Warhammer started making waves in the WoW forum community. The developer, who infamously became a meme, came on talking about, in this game, there are no nippy-pimpy healer-only classes. There is no standing in the back going, and I heal, and I heal, and I heal, cause it's boring. In Warhammer, everybody fights. Everybody gets to at least make an attempt at beating the living snot out of each other. What happened on the forums? Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. I know you're getting sick of this, but it is that consistent of a thing over the lifetime of this game, until finally free spell damage for healers was announced. So your priests could go around smiting things and not need an alt to play the entire rest of the game. Now, what World of Warcraft did to healers in the meta across multiple games and multiple genres nowadays is worth its own discussion. But this cocky attitude, Blizzie knows best, and this passive-aggressive swiping at the players thing, it did not start with this tweet, and it's not going to end with this tweet. But if Lore can't keep this off of his personal, his own time Twitter, then he needs a break from Blizzard. Because obviously, even when he's on his own time, he's still in lockstep with this idea that has annoyed people throughout the existence of this game, throughout its rise and throughout its fall. Now let's play one more what-if game. As I mentioned earlier, and we're going to get to it now, let's assume that Lore is right in being frustrated at this kind of thing. That there are people who are two-faced, that are saying, oh, people should be fired. Oh, no, people got laid off. Now, let's suppose that is 100% legit. There is no passive-aggressive nonsense in any of this, and none of this looked in any way, shape, or form like the attitude that Blizzard has annoyed people with for years. Phew, let's see here. Has WoW been known for drama over the course of its existence? Yes. And when its players defect to other games and they get mad, people assume that they come over from there. It's the whole reputation of thing. Once upon a time, I very much considered Blizzard to be the world's biggest babysitter because of WoW and the fact that it could keep folks, young drama, whatever, entertained for hours. The Blizzard forums in the early days of the game got so toxic and so full of drama, especially the Realm forums on the smaller realms that had more drama issues, that Blizzard eventually just took everything down and completely redid it from scratch with all new moderation and all new team to enforce the rules and all new set of rules. They had to start over once already, if they haven't had to since. I mean, I was only around for the initial time that the forums all went completely down and were completely started over from scratch with all new stuff. Things got that bad. So yes, WoW players are known for certain negative things. And if you can't handle these kinds of things going on, you should not be working for Blizzard. Or you should work for Blizzard on something other than Warcraft. It's that simple. This kind of behavior coming over to a personal Twitter is not helpful. It's not productive. It's not a good use of time, even downtime, if you're stressed about work when you're supposed to be on your own time. I mean, this sort of thing doesn't help things at all. And it will not serve the purpose. Whatever purpose this tweet was supposed to serve, it's not going to serve it. Unfortunately, Blizzard owns that too. You created a game that was cartoony, that could be a kiddie game similar to League of Legends at one point, before League of Legends was League of Legends. That has consequences. The back and forth between the devs and the players, because the devs strut about like celebrities, and the whole celebrity dev thing where everybody knows who everybody is on a username basis. I almost said first name basis here, but it's more of a username basis to parody that old thing. I mean, that's something Blizzard built up, and they have to own it. What they've done to the game to make it so that players don't have to rise to the occasion and overcome challenges in varying ways since the game's peak in Lich King, they did this, they have to own it. The state of the game right now and what it has declined to in the last decade, even if these folks still strut about like the game is still a 12 million subscriber juggernaut, they made it, they own it. At this point, this far into this game's life cycle, adversity with the player base should not be anything that's considered out of the ordinary. It's still not a good thing, but there are other games out there that have similar reputations, where you may not even want to play those games because you know the minute you do, you're going to have to deal with that nonsense. But that's not something that individuals can control. It's all what is built up and the consequences of what something becomes. What kind of people they attract and what kind of people they repulse. AKA demographics. AKA something that a public-facing role like a community manager should be extremely familiar with. I look forward to Blizzard's response to this versus what ArenaNet did with their Jessica moment last year, and how similar the response is and how different it is. It may speak to what exactly is going on with this company and this game in terms of what they do after something like this. This is MultimediaJay, signing off. Thanks for stopping by.